All right, welcome back. Today, we are diving into one of the absolute darkest chapters in the history of medicine. We're talking about a procedure that was sold as a miracle, but, well, it turned out to be a total nightmare. And look, I want to be really clear about this. That statement, it is not an exaggeration, not one bit. This is a shocking, documented fact. A Nobel Prize, the highest honor in medicine, was given for a procedure we would now call barbaric. So the question is just, how? How on earth did this ever happen? Well, to even begin to understand it, you have to go back in time. You have to put yourself in an era of just complete desperation when it came to treating mental illness. So, before the 1950s, psychiatry was, well, it was a pretty grim place. If you were suffering from a severe mental illness, your options were, frankly, terrifying. They were limited, and a lot of the time they were just plain brutal. You see, the state asylums were just overflowing. I mean, patients weren't being treated so much as warehoused in absolutely horrific conditions. There was really no hope for recovery. So you have doctors and families just at their breaking point, completely desperate for anything that might offer even the slightest glimmer of hope. And it's in that climate of pure desperation that this radical and honestly terrifying idea starts to take hold. The idea was this: what if you could fix the mind by physically operating on the brain itself? And that, right there, was the beginning of something called psychosurgery. Okay, so that brings us to the men behind this whole thing. How was a procedure this brutal not just invented, but actually championed by doctors who thought they were genuine pioneers? Well, the story really gets going in the 1930s with a Portuguese neurologist named Egas Muniz. Now, he had a theory. He thought that if you could just sever some of the connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex, you could cure mental illness. And get this, for that discovery, he won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1949, the highest honor in the field. It's just incredible. But it was an American doctor, a guy named Walter Freeman, who really ran with Muniz's idea and turned it into a full-blown crusade. You have to understand, Freeman wasn't just a doctor. He was a performer, a showman, and he saw a huge opportunity here, a way to make the lobotomy faster, simpler, and bring it to the masses. And what he came up with was his own invention, the transorbital lobotomy. You might know it by its other name, the ice pick lobotomy. And it was just as horrifying as it sounds. He used a tool that was literally based on an ice pick to skip the whole operating room thing. He'd use electroshock to knock the patient out, and then he'd take that pick, go in through the eye socket, tap it through the bone with a mallet, and just scramble the connections in the frontal lobes. The whole thing was over in less than 10 minutes. And he didn't just do a few of these. Freeman performed thousands of them himself. He even traveled the country in a van he nicknamed his lobotomobile, performing them on the road. All in all, we're talking tens of thousands of lobotomies performed right here in the US. Now, Freeman claimed it was a huge success, but what was really happening to these people? What did this procedure actually do to them? Well, the reality was so much darker. Sure, sometimes it did calm down patients who were agitated or violent, but the price was just catastrophic. People were left completely apathetic, almost childlike. Their personalities, everything that made them them, it was just erased. All that was left was this calm, empty shell of a person. And that's not even the worst of it. For many, it led to a vegetative state or even death. And that's the devastating truth of the lobotomy, you see. It never cured the illness. It just destroyed the person who had it. They only seemed calm because the parts of their brain that control personality, emotion, and complex thought were just scrambled permanently. I mean, it is really hard to think of anything more shocking in the history of medicine. So take a second. What's the most shocking medical procedure you've ever heard of? Go ahead and share it below. I'm genuinely curious. Okay, so a procedure this brutal, this widespread, it couldn't last forever, right? The whole house of cards that Freeman and his colleagues had built was about to come crashing down. And when it did, it happened fast, like almost overnight. And you know what's interesting? The thing that ended the lobotomy wasn't some new, better surgery or a big ethical outcry. Nope, it was a pill. The game changer was the development of the very first effective antipsychotic drugs, like Thorazine. And suddenly, there was a new and way more humane option. And the difference was just night and day. On one hand, you've got this irreversible, messy surgery that just destroys the brain. And on the other, you have medication that can actually target specific symptoms, and its effects are reversible. Now, was it a perfect cure? No, but it was a million miles away from an ice pick to the brain.
All of a sudden, there was just a better way to do things, a way to actually help people without having to demolish their minds to do it. Psychiatry had finally turned a major corner, and the lobotomy, well, it was quickly left in the dust, a bizarre relic of a much darker time.
So, what do we do with a story this horrifying? What's the takeaway here? What's the real legacy of the ice pick doctor and his so-called miracle cure? I think more than anything, it's just this chilling, cautionary tale. It's a reminder of what happens when you mix desperation with ambition and you throw scientific rigor out the window. It just goes to show how easy it is for medicine to go down a seriously wrong path, all in the name of progress. You know, this whole dark chapter really hammered home some crucial lessons. It taught us that desperation can lead to some incredibly dangerous solutions. It taught us about the absolute, non-negotiable importance of things like patient consent and medical ethics. And maybe most importantly, it taught us that sometimes the cure can be so much worse than the disease. And that's really the question that lingers, isn't it? As science keeps pushing forward, as we develop these amazing new treatments for the body and the mind, how do we make sure we never, ever repeat the mistakes of the past? We owe it to the memory of every single person who was lost to that ice pick. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. If you're into these kinds of unbelievable but totally true stories from the history of science and medicine, definitely hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you along for the next one.